This video is brought to you by the 3-Minute Board Game patrons. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. A kia ora koutou and a hee and welcome back to the 3-Minute Board Game reviews of the Arkham horror campaigns. This time, we're stopping off at the Circle Undone. So this is the first one of these reviews in quite a while, and that's because I decided I needed a new format for this. I need to make them a little bit tighter, as he ended up rambling quite a bit. So we're going to start off with a spoiler-free section at the start of the video, and then we're going to move into spoilers. It's going to be very clearly signposted. So let's start off with the hook. The Circle Undone has you trapped in the middle of a battle between supernatural forces. A witch coven on one side and the Silver Twilight Lodge on the other. Ancient evils and ghosts have been awakened, and Arkham is about to suffer the consequences of its brutal past, in particular the witch trials and the witch burnings. You and your friends are chosen by prophecy and are stuck in the middle of this conflict. Can you save Arkham City and the whole wide world? Let's talk about what's good in the Circle Undone. And the first thing here is its challenge level. Just about every scenario in the Circle Undone is tough, and there's lots of bad treacheries, lots of scary things in that encounter deck that are going to mess you up. There's also a lot of tight timers and scenarios that are really going to challenge you. This is not a campaign where you can walk in with any random deck and be assured of victory at the end. But I think that's a really important thing to have in a co-op game. You need harder scenarios, you need harder campaigns. If everything was pitched at a lowish level, then things would get stale and easy very, very quickly. Circle Undone is definitely a jump up in difficulty from most of the other campaigns I've played. The campaign also rewards flexing. It rewards characters that can do a little bit of everything. A lot of campaigns you'll probably want to have hyper-specialized fighter and a hyper-specialized clue getter, and then maybe one or two other people doing bits and pieces in between. In the Circle Undone, you'll get a bit punished if you focus too much on one aspect. You really want a character that can do just a little bit of everything. That's not to say you can't have a character that is a specialist clue getter. They just better have something in their toolbox to deal with baddies when they come along. And the same with a fighter. They need to have a couple of ways to get clues when they're needed. And I think that's some really good campaign design, because it forces players to adapt. It forces players to do something other than just go, book versus clue, book versus clue, book versus clue each turn. You need to have those tools in your toolkit as a player in this campaign in order not to have a whole bunch of skipped and wasted turns. And another fun little thing about this campaign is it's one of the most Arkham City focused ones that has been published. A lot of the campaigns have you traipsing around the world, going to different places. You might start in Arkham, but you don't necessarily stay there. And if you take a look at the old 2nd edition of Arkham Horror Map, you spend some time at a bunch of locations there, including the Witch House, the Unvisited Isle, and of course the Silver Twilight Lodge. What's not so good about the campaign? Well, first of all, it's very busy. There are a lot of treachery cards that stay in play, and there's a lot of complex treacheries as well. There's probably more bookkeeping in the Circle Undone and more tracking things that are on the table and checking different effects than there are in most campaigns. If you're a new player or someone who loses track of things quite easily, the Circle Undone is going to be quite challenging in that regard. So many cards persist. So yeah, you'll have rounds where you're like, oh, that's triggering off that, that's going to trigger that. Do we have 2 or 3 of those in effect? And you have to go through a checklist of checking on the board all these different interconnecting effects. It's a lot. The storytelling in the Circle Undone is not particularly great either. A few times through the campaign, you'll be going, why are we doing this again? What exactly is going on? And there's a couple of places where you'll get a big pile of lore just dumped on you. But they're halfway through the campaign, and it's potential that you can miss some of these things and be wandering through the whole campaign, vaguely confused about what's going on. I know the first time I played it through, I had to read back a couple of bits and just check out and go, why are we at this place again? And that's quite uncommon for Arkham Horror for me. Usually I'm like, okay, everything makes a fair bit of sense, but I think the Circle Undone has possibly the worst writing or the worst connective tissue between the scenarios. And sometimes you're just left there going, who's this? Why is this happening? So I really recommend paying close attention to what's going on, and on your first playthrough, play a character who asks questions. Let's put it that way, so you get to those lore dumps. There's also 2 or 3 scenarios in this campaign that are flat out not very fair. either because the scenario's difficulty is way up, or it's full of random number generation stuff. So it's full of random variables that sometimes you just luck out and have a terrible run of the game and lose a scenario, and there's very little you can do about it. Now that can be fun sometimes, and it definitely does up the challenge, but other times you'll be going, wow, I don't feel like I made a decision. I don't feel like I really impacted on whether we would succeed here or not, because the game just went, nah, we're just going to make this way too hard, or a chain of events is just going to go off that you can't really stop. So you have to be kind of prepared for those random variables and just how mean some of the scenarios can be. And the final bit of the spoiler-free review is, who is this for? And it's definitely not for new players. The Circle Undone is a veteran campaign. If this was your first experience playing Arkham, was the Circle Undone, you'd probably have a pretty miserable time, because there's some bits in it that are just flat out unfair and unkind. And as I said before, it's also very busy. Who it is for, though, are those players who want a real challenge, and players who aren't afraid or are comfortable with designing decks with tech in mind, like coming up with specific counters to some of the very hard questions the Circle Undone asks of players. Once you've played this campaign through, you'll have a good insight on, this tripped us up, this tripped us up, and this tripped us up, and you can build decks to counter those things. So it's quite a good one to play through a second time with those things in mind, to go, how are we going to deal with the things that screwed us over the last time, and how are we going to play the very hard scenarios that kicked us in the butt real hard. How are we going to defeat them by using the lessons that we learned last time? So it's got a lot of replay in there as well, because the challenge is so high. So yeah, not a campaign for new players, but absolutely one for veterans. And I'd put it probably in a sort of mid-tier of the campaigns for me. The challenges are great. Playing the scenarios is good. The connective tissue and the storytelling is a bit bad. And at places, it's just flat out mean and a bit busy. That concludes the spoiler-free-ish section of the review. Now onto the spoiler bits. We're going to talk about some of the core mechanics in the game, as well as just quickly run through the scenarios. The first core mechanic is Haunted. Haunted does bad things to you when you investigate a location and fail those checks. It also triggers off a bunch of different treachery cards and will mess you up through the campaign. It's fine. It's kind of stinky that it punishes failure again, and it's another one of those things that rewards you for being very good and succeeding. Not only do you get the good thing, you don't get the bad thing. So it just makes failing that much worse. So, I can take it or leave it. I don't think it's necessarily the most amazing mechanic they've ever introduced, but it's fine. I probably prefer how it interacts with the treachery cards and the encounter deck more than I do just being a punishment for failing a book check, because that's not particularly great. This campaign is also very, very tailor-made for mystics. There's a bunch of things, like there's so many will checks. There's so many treacheries that if you have counters, which are in the Mystic card pool, you can deal with them a lot easier than other players can. And a lot of creatures need magic damage, otherwise they sort of stick around, so a lot of ghosts and stuff. So Mystics are very good in the Circle Undone. In my first playthrough, I played Jacqueline Fine. I played a token manipulation deck, and she was so very, very good. She was the flex character. And again, I said in the spoiler section, playing flexes is good. I absolutely shone like a superstar during the bits where you get isolated, because in this campaign, there are segments where you're cut off from other players and you have to do stuff by yourself. So having that flexibility, which all mystics essentially are flexes, because you can just take a spell that finds clues or a spell that does damage. So there's inherent flexing within the mystic class. So yeah, playing Jackie Fine as a flex character through Circle Undone, she was really, really good. But the campaign rewards that. It rewards magic damage, it rewards having high brain. It also rewards being able to select out the tokens that suck, because some of the bad tokens in the Circle Undone are pretty awful in places. Treacheries are massive in this campaign. So as I said, having mystics and cards of Alter Fate, which can get rid of treacheries, are a really big deal. There's quite a few that you put down, and once there's 3 in play, something really bad happens. So if you can just spot pick out one of those, it makes a world of difference. And a character like Gloria Goldberg or Diana Stanley, they're quite strong in this campaign because the treachery deck is really bad in places, and they can just pick that to pieces and sort of neuter it. And the final thing I kind of want to talk about with the campaign mechanics in particular, and in a general term, is that you have to deal with persistent enemies that can't die. So there's the Spectral Watcher. It's an enemy you can't kill, it's quite tough, does a bit of damage, and has a bunch of cards that reactivate it. If you can't deal with the Spectral Watcher and it just goes around and slowly eats you to death, you're going to have a very bad time. So you need to either be able to evade it, or do a 5 burst damage real quick to knock it down. We didn't really have a plan for the Spectral Watcher in our first playthrough. We just had the Cyclopean Hammer, which seemed to do enough damage to knock it down quickly enough. And to finish things off, we're going to quickly run through the scenarios, and I'm going to give you a couple of words about what I thought of each of them. The prologue scenario, Disappearance at the Twilight Estate. It's a gimmick. There's not much I'm going to say about this one. It's kind of a bit of a letdown. I wanted these people's stories to mean more, and they only really come back in one place, and, well, in our campaign, none of them were alive. We just kind of got little cards saying, you know, this person is missing, and it just felt like a giant letdown to go through all that effort, getting on their trail and getting the clues and stuff, and then finding out, oh no, there's nothing to them. There's something about scenarios for me that are busy work. So the preludes in Hemlock Vale and this that I find far worse than reading lots and lots of writing. I'd rather read 2 pages of writing than set up and play a scenario that doesn't really mean anything. And that's my problem with the preludes, and it's my problem with this particular intro. I'd much rather this had just been a little pick-apart book than having to play out that whole scenario. That brings us to the first proper scenario, The Witching Hour. This one's really cool. This is the first time you're broken up into different groups and you're by yourself. So they throw that at you straight at the start of the campaign, and I think it's really neat. It's a big sink or swim moment, and then you come together for the crescendo. It's a good opening scenario, and especially because of that opening segment where you're thrown out and have to do stuff by yourself. It's a lot harder in 4 players because someone gets eaten by a Dark Young when everyone else gets to fight Goatspawn. And Goatspawn are a pretty nasty enemy to throw at starting characters, especially someone who's mostly a clue seeker. Still, I like how this one can be resolved with fighting or clues as well. And yeah, it's a pretty good opening scenario. At Death's Doorstep takes you back to the location of the prelude scenario, but this time it's you, and you're investigating what happened to those people that went missing, and then the Spectral Watcher turns up and everything goes to custard. This is a pretty good scenario, and I like that it's got 2 major parts to it, where you can either cut and run and treat the Silver Twilight Lodge's enemies, or and even feed them to the Spectral Watcher in some ways, or you try to save the Lodge members and try to get into the Silver Twilight Lodge's good books. The map layout's pretty good, and it is quite hard to get all the clues on this one without getting eaten by the Watcher, especially as the spectral locations and all the haunted effects start kicking in. It's a real good second scenario and a good challenge. I almost wish it was slightly deeper into the campaign, because there's only a brief gap between where you played this exact location in the prelude and you're back here already in the second scenario. So I kind of wish this was a little bit later on in the campaign, so there's a bit of a distance between the 2. It might make the prologue feel a little bit fresher. The third scenario is The Secret Name, and this one's steeped in H.P. Lovecraft lore. It's heavily inspired by a story called The Dreams in the Witch House, and features one of the main creepy things from that story, a tiny rat with a human head. And that tiny rat is going to just annoy the crap out of you all the way through the story. This is a great scenario when it comes to having a recurring baddie. This tiny annoying rat that just won't damn well go away, that just keeps stalking you. Brown Jenkins, he's just awful. Just look at the bastard, he's just gross. But the scenario design here is really cool as well, as you've got all these shifting locations going back and forth through time, and in the final climactic fight. This is a cool Arkham scenario, and at this point of the campaign, I was really amped. I was like, man, the Circle Undone, this is an awesome campaign. That leads on to the 4th scenario, The Wages of Sin. When we first played The Wages of Sin, we had a very good go at this, and we beat all 4 ghosts. We tied up all 4 ghosts, and we did it, and it was a really crunchy, hard challenge, and we did it with 1 doom left on the clock. Every time I've played the scenario since, I have either been completely crushed or I've managed to get 1 or 2 ghosts. I've never got close to doing 4 ever again. And I think the first time we got quite lucky with the arrangement of where they were. I can't remember exactly, but I think we only needed 1 ghost to be moved to the other side of the board. The other ones were either defeat twice, or they're on the locations they were supposed to be on. I think the scenario is really close to being amazing. I think it's got, like, the first time we played it, we had an amazing experience with it. It was a great scenario. Very, very hard. Very challenging. But the inherent unfairness in how the spirits are allocated and how much that dramatically changes how hard the scenario is probably the weak link here. Yeah, if you have to take the spirits all the way across the map, so much harder than if you could just defeat them in the spot they're in. And to me, that makes for bad, feel bad scenario design. Not necessarily makes it a terrible scenario as such, but it makes it a scenario that you sit there and you play it and you go, this feels bad. I feel like the game screwed with me during setup, and there wasn't much I could do to counter that. That comes on to scenario 5, the greater good, and this is a really cool one. I've played it both ways, so you can either play it as though you're sneaking into the Silver Twilight Lodge as outsiders, or that you're members of the lodge and you're trying to sort of get into different areas, and the map's laid out slightly differently. This one introduces keys, which will become a really big idea in the Innsmouth conspiracy later on, but it's the first time they're kind of implemented here. And yeah, it works. Like, this is another one where the cadence of the keys can dramatically change the difficulty of the scenario. If you get the right key you need to open up things in a certain sequence, the scenario is considerably easier than if they are out of sequence. So again, slightly frustrating scenario design that can skew the difficulty of the scenario up and down. But overall, this is a really cool one because you either will deal with Gribbly being awoken, or you can move quickly and stop it from being awoken. There's a whole bunch of different ways you can go about doing the scenario. But getting the scenario done and getting all the victory points off the locations is really challenging in this one. So I think this is one of the better scenarios in the Circle Undone. It still suffers from a recurring problem or issue within the Circle Undone, and that is the setups can just really screw you over. Scenario 6 is Union and Dissolution, and this is another one that plays differently depending on whether you have chosen the path for the Silver Twilight Lodge or for the Witch Coven. But it doesn't change too dramatically. It's mostly the enemies you'll be fighting at the end. Now, whether you like the scenario or not largely boils down to how you feel about circle tests. And circle tests are things that have popped up in this scenario and only this scenario. And their tests involve you combining skills and using clues to reach very high difficulty numbers, up to difficulty 20 in some cases. So there might be a challenge that is like brain plus foot, difficulty 12. And you can spend clues to reduce the difficulty of the challenge. There are a couple of cards out there that make these challenges somewhat trivial. So if you've got the right skill card that can just bump up one of those stats to a dramatically high level, then you can pass these checks. However, if you don't have those checks, and you don't really have good stats in those areas, and you spend a bunch of clues and then fail because you draw the tentacle, you can get really badly screwed over here. It's curious to note that this scenario also features one of the earlier campaign ends, because you can start with the Silver Twilight Lodge and finish the campaign there by giving them all the power, which is an ending of sorts. The second to last scenario is the Clutches of Chaos, and this is what I like to call a firefighting co-op or a pandemic style game scenario. There's little portals opening up all over the place. You got to run around and try to stop these breaches from opening up. And by stopping these breaches, you get clues, and the clues allow you to eventually defeat the baddie. Now, this scenario is chronic for random number generation. Just like Pandemic, if there's 3 breaches in location and another one's added, then they explode and they spread to adjacent areas and so on. So you can end up with a cadence that just blows up, boom, 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 all these locations, and you head to game over very, very quickly. And that's not to say the scenario isn't fun, you just have to get on board for the random ride that it is. And if the game doesn't go your way, you know, you can't be too salty about it. It's Arkham. And the final scenario is Before the Black Throne. And I think this scenario is really neat. I like the otherworldly feel of it. It's one of the few times, along with Lost in Time and Space, that I've really felt like our characters have left Earth and really been on another plane of existence. And this one, however, is also super swingy because it goes in 3 phases. In the first phase, you've got to pick correctly out of 2 possible exits. Second phase, you've got to pick correctly out of 3 possible exits. And third phase, you've got to pick out of 4 possible exits. And if you get that right each time, this scenario is a doddle. If you get them wrong each time, if you get to the very last one, it's very, very difficult. And there's not a lot of information you get to tell you what the right path is. You just kind of have to go, well, we're going to go to the top one. And if it turns out that it's the bottom one, and you have to traipse your way all the way back down there, too bad. That's the scenario. So I think the first 3 scenarios in this campaign are really great. But then the back half of the campaign is saddled with these cool ideas, but scenario design that changes the difficulty for each scenario quite dramatically. If you have the right locations for all the guys in the Wages of Sin, you have the easy locations to that, it's a doddle. If the keys are in the right sequence in For the Greater Good, you know, you're going to do fine. If you get lucky with the RNG in Clutches of Chaos, you'll do fine. And in the Black Throne, if you go to the right place the first time, you'll be fine. If you don't, you're screwed. And to me, most of those things aren't player agency issues. They aren't like mistakes you've made as a player. They're just the game arbitrarily going, well, this is going to be harder for you. And that is the Circle Undone in a nutshell for me. Some great ideas, some cool world building in there. The storytelling is just a bit flat, but the scenarios are just a little too swingy for me. And yeah, that concludes. Those are my final thoughts on the Circle Undone. I think it's a pretty good campaign. I'm happy to replay it, but boy, it is not without its flaws. And a reminder that 3 Minute Board Games does not do paid content. Keep us independent by supporting us on Patreon. And if you enjoyed this video, hit the notification button, like, share, and subscribe to the channel.